all know began on March 20, 2003, when President Bush ordered the invasion of Iraq. I can remember, as many of you probably do, watching it on television and seeing it when I watched with great trepidation based on the weaknesses of the administration's case for striking in the first place. But since then, our brave men and women in uniform have fought hard to help return the country to civilian rule. After a heroic sacrifice of over 8 years that cost over 4,000 American lives and nearly $1 trillion, the men and women of our armed forces can leave Iraq with their heads held high. Not so sure about those policymakers who made the decision to put their lives and America's treasure at risk. We are now ready to enter the next stage of our efforts in Iraq. In 2008, the Bush administration agreed to withdraw all U.S. troops from Iraq by the end of 2011. The Obama administration has tried to stick to that agreement and indicates that it is on track to meet that deadline. I think that is what we are going to explore here today. The State Department has been charged with the responsibility for supporting the stability and development of Iraq once the military has left. Now the task is to make sure that our military's efforts are not squandered and that Iraq's fragile stability is not lost. Let me be clear. I strongly support the drawdown of military forces in Iraq and the transition to a civilian-led mission. And I understand the extraordinary burden that this will put on the State Department, particularly since some who seem to be complaining most about the transition and whether or not it will work are the ones that voted against reducing the State Department's budget, which is sort of a contradiction in the situation. Our role today should not be to blame the State Department for the military to civilian transition that has been in process for 3 years and is required by a bilateral agreement with the sovereign nation of Iraq. Rather, our committee's role should be to press for greater management and oversight of the resources that State will be deploying in the name of the United States. This is our third hearing on the topic in the last year, under both the Democrat and Republican majorities in the House. And by most accounts, State has made important progress and is now ready to assume the mission. I want to acknowledge State for its hard work in preparing for the transition. Still, today I would like to address one ongoing concern that I have about the continuing use of private contractors in war zones. Just last week, the full committee held a hearing on the Commission on Wartime Contracting's final report to Congress. At that hearing, the Commission raised significant concerns about the future role of private security contractors who will be employed by the State Department after the military leaves Iraq. At the hearing, Commissioner Robert Henke highlighted a recently adopted Office of Management and Budget policy memo that for the first time addresses the proper role of security contractors in combat zones. The policy memo embraced a risk-based analysis to determine what functions are inherently governmental and what functions can properly be delegated to a contractor. It is an important step in the right direction. The memo continues by defining specific examples of inherently governmental functions that should never be performed by a private contractor. Notably, it found, and I quote, "Security operations performed in environments where, in the judgment of the responsible Federal official, there is significant potential for the security operations to evolve into combat," close quote, should be considered an inherently governmental function. So I would like to hear from our witnesses today, and specifically Ambassador Kennedy, about the intended role of security contractors in Iraq after the transition. And I would like you to specifically address the OMB's guidance that was cited by Commissioner Henke. In his written statement today, Ambassador Kennedy said that the Department of State will employ approximately 5,000 private security contract employees in Iraq. I agree with his assessment that this is a significant number. But beyond the number of security contractors that will be employed in Iraq, I am concerned about the specific functions these contractors will be expected to perform. For example, I understand the Department will employ a number of contractors who will be responsible for rapid response to security situations in the field, in addition to the stationary security forces who will be responsible for protecting the embassy. These rapid response forces will be responsible for emergency response, including securing State Department employees in the case of an attack. To my mind, this situation would almost certainly require the private security contractors to engage in combat. I think any reasonable person would see that to be a direct conflict with the OMB policy memo and therefore an improper use of private security contractors under that guidance. Ambassador Kennedy, I look forward to hearing how the Department plans to deal with this issue and others. I want to thank all of our witnesses again once more for showing your interest here today. Yield back.